I'm just going to jump straight in because we have just an hour for me to talk. That's my understanding. I'll finish at around 10 after 7, and that in order to be able to leave some time for questions. And there'll be many more things that I present than you can actually ask questions about. It's kind of a waterfall of knowledge. But I've titled the talk "Solving the Frankenstein Problem," which in a sense is what students are trying to do when they use AI to do their work. They're trying to pull together all the pieces and have, and then like make a whole learning opportunity, an experience, a product out of all these pieces. And when we're trying to use evidence-based approaches in education, that again is something that really is at the forefront of teachers' minds. How do we take all of the different goals and learning opportunities and information about our students and who they are and what we need them to do and the opportunities they have with AI tools and other kinds of tools, and design opportunities for them to be whole people thinking and learning through the opportunities we're providing for them, as compared to thinking about what are they producing at the end, just without really focusing on the developmental process that gets them there. And what I'm going to argue is that in order to solve this problem, which, by the way, AI can do a lot of things incredibly well, but it does not do this well or yet at all. It does not have a sense of ethics. It does not have a sense of kind of what makes sense and what would be creative in a deep, useful sense, right? It's merely echoing back to us what it sees in the world, in the information on the internet. And it's taking that and producing stuff. So what I'm saying is that, AI doesn't actually do a lot of what we're claiming that it can do. Because it's merely, it does not generate information, right? It's called generative AI, but that's sort of a misnomer. It actually just echoes back information by integrating things that it finds out in the world. And that can be useful, but in using it the way students are, what we're really doing is asking ourselves, what I see this conference about is asking ourselves, what is worthwhile to have done yourself in a learning opportunity? And that question is fundamentally related to, well, what's the goal? What are we trying to achieve in an education opportunity? Because if it's going out and gathering together facts, you're right, AI can do that extremely well, right? And if it's taking those facts and putting them together into some kind of synthesis and putting that out, AI can do that extremely well, right? But so one of the sort of central metaphors I can start with as a kind of joke to give you a sense of where I'm heading with this, um, using AI to do your assignments in an indiscriminate way, right? In a way that isn't attached to using it as a tool for what it's good for, but actually preserving the piece that the human needs to engage in order to grow themselves for the human to do, is akin to telling the parents of 8-month-old children, don't have your child crawl, right? Just put them up on some magic shoes that are going to prop them up and make them able to run and ride a bike and play soccer, right? Straight out of the gate, like from baby to running, because crawling's not a skill you're ever going to need again in the real world. It doesn't matter, right? Except when you circle back and think, oh, the opportunity to crawl for a baby is not about achieving crawling, right? You're right. You're never going to use that again. After about 2 months, you're done with it, and that's that, right? Crawling is an opportunity for the hands and the legs and the front and the back of the brain and the visual system to coordinate themselves in ways that are going to be critical for the development of that person over time. The opportunity to engage in learning to crawl is itself a developmental opportunity that is formative to the growth of the person. If you outsourced that onto technology special shoes that could hold the kid up and have them run along, that kid would end up having missed a potentially very important opportunity to wire themselves up, to grow themselves in ways that they're going to need to have grown themselves in order to manage themselves later. So it's not about achieving the goal of walking and running as soon and as fast as possible. And similarly, in education, it's not about producing the output that's the assignment, as soon as possible. No one cares about these students' assignments after they're handed in. They're not pieces of work that you're thinking you're going to return to as great artifacts. It's the process of having produced them that is actually the focus of the educational enterprise, not the endpoint. And I'm going to show you in the brain how this works, and I'm going to show you in teachers what it looks like as we move through. I don't know how much we'll get to in the time I have, but I will try. So I've started the talk with a painting by my colleague Margaret Lazari, who was the chair of the Fine Arts Department at USC before she retired some years ago. And she made this painting out of some of our brain data, right? So when you look in real life, this is like a 6 by 8 foot gigantic painting, watercolor, vibrant watercolor of a seascape, right? And in the middle, you see these little squiggly waves or reflections of the clouds. What those actually are is the white matter from one brave person's brain who went in our scanner and agreed to let us take pictures of her brain. And then we peeled off the outside, all of the little cells that make up the cortex, right? The cells around the outside that are the neurons that do the firing. We peeled those off the picture, not off the woman, okay, just to be clear. And what's left are these literally billions and billions of microscopic little tails of salt water that are synapsing, that are connecting out onto, on average, 200,000 others in this incredibly complex and dynamically shaped network that is changing in real time as you're using it. And those networks represent the functional capacities of our human brain. And they're not just in our brain and in our head. Those networks of neurons actually reach all the way down into the ends of your fingers and toes and all the way back up through your spinal cord and back up into your brain again. We are a complete network of connectivity. And that connectivity is organized quite literally by the way in which we use it. And so we have new findings with late adolescents showing just from late teenagerhood into young adulthood, right? 16, 17, 18 years old up to 22 and 23 years old, showing the brain development that is happening across that time period. And we were actually able to relate the brain development that happened to the patterns of thinking that those young people were engaging spontaneously when we interviewed them about complex issues that we shared with them about the world. The way in which we use our mind is literally growing our brain in ways that in turn produced life satisfaction in young adulthood, achievement in young adulthood, satisfaction with one's relationships, liking yourself, just how much kids in their, or young adults in their early 20s said, I slided a little slider bar to say how much you like the person whom you've become. I really like myself. I don't like myself at all, right? These are the things that the brain development predicted, and that brain development in turn was predicted by the way they were thinking in the original interviews at the 5 years before in the beginning of the study. That is a really powerful statement about, if you will, going back to that crawling metaphor, how the ways that young people think about ideas are literally like crawling for the brain. It's them organizing and shaping the network coordinations in their head that are later going to build the physical structure of their brain in ways that produce durability, resilience, emotional resilience, well-being, relationship satisfaction, and achievement. You cannot outsource that to a product that is produced with a machine. The opportunity to engage in the thinking patterns themselves are what produces the growth. It's like exercise for the mind and brain. When you exercise, there are a myriad of benefits, right? For your health, for your longevity, for your sleep, for your digestion, for your muscle strength, for all these things, right? You don't get those benefits unless you actually do the work. And what we're finding is in the brain, it's like that. Education is not about producing the endpoint work. the product at the end. It's about the process that got you there. And engaging with ideas is the process that physically and mentally grows young people. So let me go into this. This is just a little provocation just to start us off and kind of say like, what, really? Okay. This is a picture of two cats. You may recognize these cats. The cat in the upper left-hand corner with the orange on it her name is Rainbow. She is the mother cat. And she is the first cat that was genetically cloned to produce an identical cat from her genes. And that's the cat in the middle of the photo, whose name is Cece for copycat, right? So these two cats are, for all intents and purposes, genetic clones. And what you immediately notice when you look at them, one is orange, the other is not. One is skinny and jumping off the table before you can take its picture. The other one is sort of chubby and sitting placidly watching while you take its picture, right? These two cats are genetic clones. What that tells you is that our genes do not produce a human or any kind of organism, actually. Our genes do not just unfold automatically to grow somebody when you do things. You have to physically and emotionally and mentally experience the world. And by doing so, you grow yourself in accordance with the tools you have, including the genetic tools you have. You'll never make a black long-haired cat out of Cece's genome, but the number of cats you can make from her genes is infinite. What does that tell you about the role of experience in growing an organism? So this is a picture of a human being now. So this is not me. I never put pictures of myself. This is my sister and my little niece, Nina. Nina was the smaller of a pair of twins who was born in an emergency C-section when my sister and both the girls were all anesthetized. And so this is the first time that Nina has met her mother when they're both awake. And Nina weighs about 2 kilos in this picture, right? There are so many things we can talk about here, but what I want you to see especially is what Nina brings to this interaction, and also what my sister brings to this interaction. At the same time, what the context enables in this interaction. So ask yourself, in what way is this picture demonstrating something cognitive? In what way is it demonstrating something emotional, something social, something cultural, something biological? It is all of those things at once. And when, as scientists, we divide the mind or the world up into these smaller pieces like a Frankenstein, we try to sew them back together. That's not how biology works, and it's not how the biology of our mind works. We experience things actively based on the tools we have, and from there, we grow ourselves in an active, agentic way by the way in which we use our biological affordances. So, you could say about Nina, she's born with the proclivity or the reflex to stare at 2 dark dots in the back of her visual system, right? In the back of her head, in her brain, built into her visual system genetically, is a reflex that if she sees 2 dark dots in front of her eyes, she will stare at them, right? And, not 3 dots, not flashing dots, not dots moving in weird patterns, 2 of them in this orientation. And then along comes a person and sets up Nina's world at a time when it's conducive to her. She's awake, right? She's not hungry. She's not cold. And my sister holds everything else about the baby so that she doesn't have to worry about her posture or her hands or her head, so that everything is set up just right so she can elicit that one reflex that she has that then happens automatically. And as it does, they start to build a kind of empathic resonance where my sister is showing that baby, hey, you can stare at dots. Look what that is good for. Look what that's an entry point into in the world. Don't stop with dots. Move to social things. And here we are doing this together. And did somebody take my sister and remind her that, babies don't see very well when they're first born? So, if you want to optimize her learning design experience, you're going to want to get out a ruler and, just about 8 to 10 inches from your nose is perfect for Nina to be able to see you. I mean, of course not, right? How does my sister know to hold Nina in exactly this distance? Because Nina is giving her feedback by virtue of her attention, her agency, her own emotion and engagement, that this is the distance in which I can see your eyes. Move me too close and I'm going to start staring at your hairline and wandering my eyes around the room. Move me too far away and again, the same thing will happen. But right in that sweet spot, that's the distance I need you to set the world up for me so that I can invoke what I bring and use that for something. And I know we're talking about infants and not college-age kids, but the thing is, college-age kids and 90-year-old elderly people are human beings, and this proclivity doesn't go away. This is a kind of glimpse into the fundamental nature, the social, cultural, biological, cognitive nature of the way we develop ourselves through learning. And so when you put this together, think for a moment about any time you've been in a place in the world where the cultural norms for eye gaze are even minutely different than what you're used to where you grew up, right? So people are looking at you just a little too long, right? And you feel like, why are you so aggressive? Why are you staring at me? Or people are flipping their eyes away or standing a little farther away than you're used to and just looking away sooner than you expect. And you think like, what? Are you not trustworthy? Why are you not looking at me while you're talking, right? And the meaning of that example is to show that even though we come with the biology to stare at eyes, that biology through the social relationships that we've engaged in around us, which are of course deeply cultural, shapes the biological growth over time. It tunes it so that it can be used optimally in that environment. And when you get that environment you move that person into a new environment where the norms are slightly different, the biological things are now out of sync. So my point is that we think of biological aspects of the brain as somehow different than the cognitive or the emotional or the social or the cultural aspects of brain development. This is just her biology. She comes with a this, that kind of brain, right? A happy brain, a dyslexic brain, or whatever you want to say, a smart brain, a hardworking brain, right? But actually, that's the completely wrong way to think about it. Our brain is the product of an interaction actively driven by the person as they engage with trying to live in the world. We grow ourselves based on fundamental biological capacities that are enacted in social contexts. And so what I want us to just take away from this is the essential social nature and emotional affective experience of the learning process always. There is no such thing as thinking deeply about something without emotion, because the brain doesn't waste energy doing work that doesn't matter. So when we see a real problem with our students outsourcing their work to just try to get it done, what that tells you is that the emotion they're having is about the wrong thing. The emotion is about getting it done as compared to the process of doing the work. And the bottom line idea that I'm going to leave you with today is that good pedagogy shifts the emotions people are having as they learn away from emotions that are mainly about the endpoint, the result, the final thing that you get out of it, and instead are now mainly about the process of experiencing the getting there, because that process is the learning process. So think about it this way. Whatever you're having emotion about, is what you're thinking about. And whatever you're thinking about, you could possibly be learning about. So we need to ask ourselves, what are we as instructors and our students having emotion about? Not what emotion are we having, but what are we having emotion about? Is the emotion about the endpoint, the exam, the thing you're going to get next, right? The accolades, the failures, the whatever? Is the emotion about the intrinsic interest of the material you are learning about? Because whatever the emotion's about is what you are going to take away with you as a learner. If the emotion's about the endpoint, you're going to remember about endpoints, tests, feeling this way, feeling that way. If the emotion is about the process of thinking through the ideas, that is how you grow learners who have deep understanding. You cannot outsource that process, just like you can't outsource crawling for the 8-month-old and expect them to grow up and play sports. This is a little song, right? I'm just kind of taking you through the ages, because in children, it's easy to see because they put it all out there for you, right? There's a song written by my daughter when she was 6. Don't try to read it unless you're a kindergarten teacher, which I presume none of you are, right? But she's singing a song for her baby brother. This is a music stand, and she's got a picture of herself there. And I won't sing for you, okay? I'll just read it. She says, "Oh, Teddy," her brother's name is Theodore, so she calls him Teddy. "Oh, Teddy, we love you more than the whole earth size. As the earth spins every day, we love you as much as usual, but sometimes even more, as you make us proud and happy that you're you." So I have a simple question for you. Is this a song about this little girl's love for her baby brother? Is this a song about her budding interest in planetary science? Right? Those two things are not different things in the brain or the mind. And my daughter is showing us how she felt about her baby brother and also was learning about this gigantic planet, this ball of dirt we're on that's spinning through space and is getting shined on by a star. And when we go around the other side, because we're turning, the star can't shine on us because we're in the dark side, and that's night. And then we come back and whoa, that's huge. That's huge, just like I love my baby brother is huge. Those two ideas are going to come together for me, and that process of realizing that myself is so powerful that I'm going to go get a pencil and a paper and crayons, and I'm going to figure out how to write it down, which is a ton of work for a little kid. That's motivated learning. Nobody did that to her. Nobody gave her that. She was introduced to a world where interesting things were surrounding her, and she built meaning. That meaning building process is the learning you want in your students. I'm going to skip this because we're running out of time. I just want to get to here. So emotions might be automatic, right? You automatically love your baby brother if you just settle in around him and coo and shush and hold him. Then naturally your heart rate goes down, your breathing slows, your blood pressure goes down, right? All of those things happen. But what I would argue is that education and learning are about learning how to feel, not what to feel, how. The process by which you connect your interest in planetary science, for my daughter, who's now about to start her PhD, right, in this stuff, your interest in planetary science to your feelings of love and attachment. They started out planetary science and love and attachment to my baby brother. Over time, they became a deep interest in planetary health and, in her case, immunology, and the way she could study that as a way to make people and the planet healthier, right? I'm going to share with you a short video that shows you a little entry into the experiments that we did with teenagers that I'm going to show you some data from. And so I just want you to get a sense of what the lab looks like. And so I'm going to play this for you. It's just a couple minutes long. It's from an American television show called Nova, which is a science series. Yes. Okay. Sorry.
Hey, welcome. Thank you for coming. I'm Mary Helen. Nice to meet you.
Since her days as a teacher, University of Southern California neuroscientist Mary Helen Immordino-Yang has been interested in knowing how emotions factor into learning.
I quickly realized that there was very, very little known about the kind of stuff that we really care about in education, like how people become inspired. How do we become interested in things? How do we build curiosity? And how can we support that process?
In trying to identify which parts of the brain are involved in the deepest and most meaningful learning, Immordino-Yang works with teens from troubled neighborhoods.
We're going to be watching stories. We really want to know what you think, so there's no right or wrong answers. These are kids who see a lot of crime, they see a lot of dangerous things, they see a lot of poverty. And we wanted to understand, how do they make meaning of that world around them? This first one is a story about a girl who lives in Swat, Pakistan. And the city was being taken over and basically run by a group called the Taliban. So I want you to watch her when she was 12 years old.
First, she gets them emotionally engaged in a topic by showing them videos about people struggling to overcome adversity.
And I want to become a doctor.
So how does her story make you feel?
This story makes me feel upset how she wants to be a doctor and continue on with her education, but it makes her sad that knowing her journey would be very difficult.
For adolescents, these types of stories can trigger moments of deep reflection.
They come back from those kind of reflective moments with this heightened appreciation of the meaning of the story and what it applies to in their own life and what it means for the nature of the world more broadly.
And it's crazy how it's that powerful.
Whereas we've known that for a long time in education, the neural data are giving us new insights into the mechanics of that process. Over here.
To find out which brain regions are harnessed during reflective emotion, Immordino-Yang monitors the students' brain activity as they re-watch the emotional videos in an fMRI scanner.
Hi, Estella, how you doing in there?
Good.
So we're looking at the movement of the blood flow in her brain as she's watching the stories, and where in her brain is becoming more and less active as she's experiencing these emotions.
She found that the reflective thinking caused by these emotional videos triggers widespread activity throughout the brain.
The most high-level brain states that people experience in the scanner don't just activate high-level systems, they also activate lower-level structures of the brain that are involved in regulating and monitoring your consciousness and your survival.
Immordino-Yang believes that the reason why learning and emotion seem so intimately connected is because complex emotion, like admiration, can activate basic brain functions, like those regulating breathing and heart rate.
We think that the reason that humans' values and belief systems and ideals are such powerful motivators is literally that they're hooking themselves into biomechanical machinery that has evolved to keep us alive over time. So emotions are a critical piece of learning always. Meaningful learning, learning that really matters to you, that changes who you are, and that endures over time, always has an emotional component.
Okay, so you get a sense of what it looks like. These were experiments that were done with teenagers from Los Angeles, poor Los Angeles neighborhoods. Okay, but the findings relate to others that we've done in China, that we've done across adults at the university here. And what we basically showed is, just like my little nephew here is showing, right? That when we experience deeply motivated thinking that we're feeling emotions about, we're literally using brain systems that feel and regulate the body and construct a sense of self. And this is why meaningful learning involves emotion. So let's actually look at what happened in the brain. So this first study I'm showing you is just the brain data from adults from the university when they told us from the scanner that they were thinking deeply about the story that we shared with them in the scanner, and really feeling deeply motivated to engage with it and deeply emotional about it. Okay, So what do we have? Basically, emotionally engaged thinking activates the same brain systems that keep you alive. So we think about emotion as being sort of separate, like thinking's happening, and then sometimes it becomes emotional. And when that happens, it's really motivated thinking. It's not like that. The motivation and the thinking are the same thing in the brain. We as scientists have created Frankenstein monsters where we carve those up and look at them as if they're separate, but they're not separate. The thinking and the feeling are two ways of looking at the same thought process, right? My mentor at Harvard as a grad student, his name was Kurt Fisher. He used to say emotion and cognition are two sides of the same coin. And he was absolutely right, even though we didn't have these brain data yet. So what do we have? I'll just give you a little bit of a tour through some of the brain regions, and then we'll go back and look at the teenagers and the teachers. This is a map, a statistical map in orange of all the places in the brain where there was reliably more blood flowing when people told us they were deeply emotionally engaged with what they were thinking about than when they told us they weren't so emotionally engaged with what they were thinking about at that moment. Okay, and on purpose, we had stories in there that were not meant to be as interesting to think about so that they would move back and forth. So what are these regions? First, the brainstem. Okay, this is a slice through the middle of someone's head. This is their nose, their tongue, this is their neck, this is their spinal cord. These are regions that are sitting on a kind of stalk between the whole rest of the brain and the spinal cord, which goes out to your face and your body and back in again. That's that network I talked about at the beginning. This is sitting in the middle. If you get damage here, you get things like persistent vegetative state and coma and even death. If you get damage down here at the bottom of the field of view of the scanner, right above the spinal cord in this part called the medulla, we can't even keep you alive on life support. Your heart doesn't know when to beat. You forget to breathe and you rapidly die. How does this speak to the integrated nature of our survival mechanisms and our thinking? They're not separate things. If you outsource the thinking to AI, what do you have left? Not much that counts like survival, right? The kids are actually telling us, I don't have a sense of purpose. I don't know why I'm here, right? That feeling is generated, the deep motivational feeling is generated by actually using your own self to think. What else do we have? The anterior insula. So now we're up at the top of the head, right? So we're cutting across this way and turning it up. So we've got basically the forehead here and the back of the head here. These two pieces of tissue called the insula are tucked in underneath. This is a picture from Gray's Anatomy, the textbook, not the TV show, for those of you who know it, okay? Eyeball goes right here, neck goes down. This is the back of the head, the front of the head. And what do we know about these tissues? So from early neurosurgeries in the 1950s by a famous physician named Wilder Penfield, he was trying to cure intractable epilepsy, and he didn't have neuroimaging yet. So he would go into someone's brain, he would put them to sleep, open up their head, wake them back up, and poke around in their brain and ask them, what are they feeling? What are they thinking? So that he would know not to remove their memory from their grandma or something when he was trying to cure their seizures. And he kept exquisite notes of what people said when he poked in different places. What happens when you poke around up in here, which is where those orange spots were that I just showed you in the anterior insula? The person vomits, or they get other kinds of gastromotoric distress, which I won't describe in polite company, okay? What he had discovered is that these are visceral somatomotor cortices. They are the feeling that tells you your heart's pounding when you run up the stairs, or when you're frightened, or when you're in love, right? The feeling of how your lunch is sitting as you're digesting it. Do you have a stomach ache or not? All of those feelings of your inside body are the same place you play out thinking. Thinking is not happening in a separate place. Thinking is happening on the same brain system that feels your body. No wonder our emotions are so connected to the way in which we think. And we showed very interesting cultural differences, for example, in the ways these regions were recruited. For example, at students at Beijing Normal University and students at University of Southern California here in Los Angeles. And we found an intermediate pattern in first generation Chinese students studying here in Los Angeles, right? There are these shapes of the ways that this activity gets experienced as emotional meaning, but everyone was using these regions to the same amount in all the cultural groups. We are learning to use these felt regions to repurpose them for thinking about ideas. And others, like Samir Zeki in London, has shown in a study done quite a few years ago now, that expert mathematicians, you put them in the MRI scanner and ask them to look at equations that are either elegant and beautiful equations or ugly and awkward equations. And just the fact that mathematicians know what you mean by that should already tell you what you're going to find. When they said that these equations were beautiful, they again activated these same regions that are feeling the inside of your guts and your viscera. We don't have a separate brain for thinking and one for feeling and one for keeping your body alive. That's a Frankenstein monster. We're not that. We take our basic feelings of our guts and we repurpose them for feeling about ideas. And that is the purpose of education. Because how well do you need to understand those mathematical equations you're looking at before you can understand why they're beautiful? They're beautiful because of their power, because of what they allow you to calculate in the world, because of how parsimoniously they predict things. Think how thoroughly you need to understand the math before you can feel its beauty on the state of your own self. That's what learning does for you. Just getting the right answer does not do that for you. And the anterior middle cingulate is a region that's involved in a lot of things to do with motivation, learning, but it's also bodily arousal. It's the when you see a snake in your path, right? Or, for example, if you're really thirsty and you, what do? You go get a glass of water and you drink the glass of water. Now you don't feel thirsty anymore, right? But did you ever think, like, how do you not get thirsty anymore? When you're thirsty, the hypothalamus over here is tasting your blood and saying, haha, it's a little too concentrated. I'm going to make the thirsty feeling come on. Okay, thirsty drive, go get some water, drink it. And then the cingulate says, okay, I feel the water going down, gulp, 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 about this much. I think about that much based on all the times I've drunk water before when I was this thirsty. That's about enough. I'm going to turn off my thirsty feeling. I'm going to turn off my motivation to drink. Has the water actually gotten into your bloodstream and gotten back to your hypothalamus yet? No, that's going to take some time. It's your brain calculating that you're not needing anymore. And that same system is involved in all kinds of things. We have papers showing that it's involved in math learning, for example. So don't try to read this. This is kind of a placeholder for me, but you can go look up the study if you care. We have a really interesting study led by a student named Solange Desnervaux in Geneva, Switzerland. She went into Montessori-schooled classrooms and traditional Swiss classrooms with equivalent families, all upper middle class, all high performing. And she had 8 to 12-year-old kids do math problems in the MRI scanner. And what did we find? A lot of things. But what was really interesting is, first of all, the two groups of kids, the traditional schooled and the Montessori, who had to kind of discover the math by teaching it to themselves and each other with the materials, right? Where the teacher's job is to help orient them to the lesson and how to use the materials. And the kid's job is to figure out the math based on those, right? Whereas in the traditional classroom, the teacher teaches the math, the student does the math, gives it back to the teacher grades and corrects it, gives it back, the student gets their grade, fixes it, right? The teacher is the holder of knowledge, and the student is trying to please the teacher by producing the knowledge, as compared to in a Montessori classroom where the kid discovers the knowledge. The teacher is the person who organizes the context so that the kid is likely to discover what they need to know and not just waste time flopping around with things that don't matter. Okay. What happened? Both groups of kids got the same number of problems right on the math. So you could stop and say, oh, it doesn't matter what kind of math classroom you're in, because they all got the same number right. But you can't stop there. What we found also is that the Montessori schooled kids got far more wrong because they didn't skip anything that they weren't sure of. The traditionally schooled kids refused to try if they weren't sure because they didn't want to get anything wrong. And what happened was the Montessori schooled kids gave it a whirl when they weren't sure, they got it wrong, and then they thought about it, and we can see that in the brain, and then they got it right the next time, and over time they learned. Whereas the traditionally schooled kids never fixed their errors because they were afraid to try. So what we saw in the brain was that the anterior middle cingulate, that center, right, that you're seeing right here, would say, when the kid got something right in the traditionally schooled kids, and then that cingulate would start talking, so to speak, through those networks to the hippocampus. That's long-term memory. It's as if the kid is saying, that's right, remember that, right? When traditionally schooled kids got something wrong, we just see in the brain, and we couldn't figure out any particular pattern. And they were not more likely to get it right the next time. They didn't learn over time. They kept making the same mistake. Whereas the Montessori schooled kids, when they got something right, we don't see much in the brain at all. When they got it wrong, we see the anterior cingulate go, and then it talks to the frontal cortex, which is, oh, let me think about this, and the right parietal lobe, which is math. It's the arms and legs body, and it's the same place in your brain where you do quantity and calculation. So it's as if that kid is saying, that's wrong? Really? Oh, let me figure that out. And then they get it right the next time. This is a really instructive experiment for education. Even though it's 8 to 12-year-old kids, what it shows us is that getting the right answer is not enough information for teachers to know what's going on there. Because learning is essentially about the experience of the person doing the work. That's what matters, because that's going to determine how much they're going to learn over time and their motivation to continue. We're setting kids up with AI jumping to the end point and just getting the right answer. What we're doing is setting them up to not be interested and to not continue, because we're devaluing the process of thinking about math. The emotion in that is about the end point, not about the process. So meaningful learning in the complex sense in which it happens in school or the real world is not a rational or a disembodied process, and it's not a lonely process. You are using your own self, which is a social way of engaging with the world, to begin to make sense of what you're seeing. I'm going to skip ahead. Just forgive me for 1 second. I'm going to skip ahead to the teachers. So there's a lot about teenagers and how their brains develop, but I'm worried to run out of time. So I'm just going to skip ahead and tell you what happened here. What we basically found out is that when people were thinking about deep ideas in the brain, we saw them activating and deactivating networks for emotion, for thinking, and for planning in ways that over time physically predicted the growth of their brain. In order to do this, it basically meant that meaningful learning is shifting teachers and students from emotions that are about the endpoint to the emotions that are about the actual process and the idea. So let's look at a young man saying this. He's reading an essay at the end about his experience in a math class. He had never passed a math class before. He was a Sudanese new immigrant who had never been to school before. And he's 18 years old, and it's the first time he's taken a math class. And rather than starting at the beginning, the teacher gave him a big problem and helped him over months to solve it. And he says, I want to be the first person in my family to graduate from college, but I never even imagined I could reach that level of math. Math at my school has helped me learn mathematically, learn how to think outside the box and different strategies. When I was given a problem, I had to think in a new way and research ideas I don't know before, right? He's growing himself through the process of doing the problem, not saying, and then I got the right answer and now I feel good, right? I've spent 2 months working on a problem called walking to the door. It led me to think about limits and the idea of asymptotes. I had to study fractions. I had to learn fractions because I had to think about this problem I had. And through doing the problem, I got fascinated by finite and infinite. I was able to connect it to my life, right? What happens is as young people are thinking about the fractions and the ideas, and they're moving these brain networks and balancing them back and forth actively, what we can actually show is they're tickling up those brain systems that are your guts and your viscera, and those feel like me. That is where relevance and agency in the learning process comes from. The feeling of thinking starts to get connected to the guts and viscera of your own self, and you experience that as me doing the thinking, as me being a mathematician, as me being smart. That's the process you're aiming for. That's where true motivation comes from. We're undermining our kids' motivation by motivating them with endpoints. That does not involve a sense of self. Let's look quickly at a teacher study. So we went around the Los Angeles city and we went into, in this case, high schools. So these are 16, 17, 18-year-old students mainly, and asked who are the best teachers in the school, right? We asked the administrators that, and those teachers were so wonderful. They came and did experiments with us, even went in our MRI scanner while they graded their students' work. And another team that's separate from us went into their classrooms and videotaped them doing their work with kids and analyzed how they did their work, and showed that even though these teachers were all super dedicated to the kids, some of them were much more skilled in the way they engaged the learners in the process of learning as compared to helping them get to the end point. And it looked different in the brain in ways that actually were related to the students' learning outcomes. So what do we see? 40 teachers graded their students' work in our MRI scanner. And so we had their students do assignments that were sent to us. And then we made matched assignments that we said were from students they don't know. Okay, we said they were off the internet. Actually, we wrote them to be equivalent quality as their real student, but not their real student. And we had them grade the two. And what happens? They gave the same grade to their own student and the matched fake student that was not somebody they know. Okay, so they know what they're doing. But the brain activity when they were grading their own students was hugely different. And here is where the differences are. And I'll take you a very quick tour through this, but you know some of these places. This is the anterior cingulate. This is, right? Or like, oh, I'm thirsty. Give me more water. No, that's about enough. I'm done drinking now. I'm going to not feel motivated anymore to drink, right? Being involved in math, right? Same area that the kids with Montessori versus traditional schooling were using to know should they keep trying when they got something wrong or should they just freak out. This lateral parietal lobule is the region that's involved in thinking about mathematical ideas and attention. They were activating it more. These are the teachers. Anterior insula is your guts, your viscera. Poke you there with Wilder Penfield and the person vomits, right? And up here, we're getting all the same regions working harder in the teachers. And some teachers, so this is just a graph. You can find the paper online if you want to read it. We're publishing it soon. This is a graph of the difference in the brain activity amongst teachers grading their own students versus students they don't know. And it differed across teachers. Some teachers showed a big difference. And this, again, is the anterior cingulate. It's that region, right? How much do I want to do this? How thirsty am I, right? That kind of thing. And some teachers showed a little difference. And guess what? We could predict the difference based on the way the teacher did their work. So we interviewed the teachers about a lot of things. We saw them in their classes, as I said, and they were doing better work there. We also asked them to do tasks and we interviewed them. So we asked them, could you just give your feedback to your student? So here's your student, Mary Helen. This is your real student. What would you say about Mary Helen if you could meet with her and tell her how you think she's doing and how she should do better? Okay. And then we looked at the ways teachers framed that feedback, and based on that, we could predict their brain activity when they were grading their students, and we could predict how good they were in the actual classroom. So what do we have? Some teachers said things like, this student has been very consistently inconsistent the whole year. She doesn't have the grades or the effort to keep up with her learning. She just chooses not to do the work. I try. There's been many methods and reaching out, and it's a lot of back and forth and tugging. And I think she needs to work a little bit more on building up that diligence and wanting to do it. Right? How many of us have felt like that about a student? Right? But just think about what in here is the teacher aiming for? getting the student to do the thing that will produce the outcome. Do it, okay? Here, I mean, she's one of my star students, I think. She's definitely like, if I were to say this is what a student should be like, Nancy's exactly that. I do think she could push herself a bit more just because I know she's capable of pushing herself academically, but I mean, she's doing great. I would just want her to keep doing what she's doing. Do. Get your work done. That's what you're supposed to do. Now look at the next one. Yeah, Saria is also really open-minded. She's courageous. She's a curious thinker. She breaks down really complex issues and sees the issue from a lot of sides. So that open-mindedness as well. And I would love to see her share more and practice more courage and like sharing her ideas and building off of other people and also just being more confident in what she's saying because she's had such amazing things to say. And so kind of practicing that muscle of courage, I think will also like build their confidence and help her collaborate with others in her thinking. That's a really different kind of answer. That is not about like, Saria, you need to do your work. This is about, Saria, you've got amazing ideas. Learn how to be courageous in expressing them and working with other people and really thinking. This teacher's focusing on the process of thinking, not on did you do the end point. And another one, I think he hits a place where he stops and I think he's like, I'm done. And I think the really hard work for him is going to be figuring out how to think of more things and not outsourcing that to AI, figuring out for himself how to think of more things. I think that's a skill, actually. It's like, how do you make yourself think more things? You have to ask other people what they think and value and what people are saying about the thing. And that is part of the same problem where it's like valuing other people and valuing their time. We're going to work on that, especially now that he's in honors, right? Where you expect more. This, again, this teacher's saying like, look, you're not doing your work, but she's not focused or he on do the work. They're saying, look, you don't know how to think more things. Teach yourself to think things. How do you do that? Start asking other people. Start thinking what they care about. Think about what does that mean for me? Do I agree? Start engaging with that. That's exactly the process we're shortchanging when we have kids do ideation and outlines and summaries and things with AI. So meaningful learning, just to sum up, shifts teachers and students from emotions that are about the endpoint, which you achieve by doing a lot of shortcuts like AI, to emotions that are about ideas, which you achieve by actually engaging and thinking about the ideas yourself. And when you do that, you are literally growing your physical brain. I didn't show you that, but I can show that's published. It's in Nature Scientific Reports and the papers are on my website. Right? We literally physically saw growth in the networks of the brains the more kids were doing that. So high quality education accomplishes three big goals. It helps students learn to build the kinds of narratives that reflect the content and the skills they're engaging with in school. They are building a story and engaging with the process. And it helps them expand the range of topics and skills and ideas that they can recruit in the service of enriching and continually re-envisioning these narratives. I need to learn about fractions so I can think about infinity, right? And Zeno's paradox of walking to the door. I never would have bumped into that had I not been in this class. Thanks, teacher, for introducing me to this new range of topics I could get interested in that I never knew I could. And it provides targeted, situated support and instruction for acquiring the building block skills necessary for accessing information and solving problems and communicating. This is in service of number 1 and 2. It's never the first thing. It's the thing that happens because you need it, because the kids are building stories about thinking about the information, and then they need to know about fractions. Please tell me again, right? Or another kid, and an example from a teacher. This kid has lived through the foster care system in the United States, and he wants to write a commentary for the newspaper about how he thinks it should be redone. And he says, like, again, can you teach me topic sentences? Because I need people to understand what I have to say. It really matters, right? I have experience that I want to share with others. That's the point of being in my language arts class. So meaningful learning, again, is shifting you from results to ideas, which is really a major paradigm shift in the way we think about education. This is a paper I wrote with 3 colleagues about this notion that we need to start putting not the center of the universe, the learning outcomes, but the center of the universe, the experience of thinking here. What does it feel like to think here, because that emotional process of thinking is what is determining how you are growing yourself and learning through the experience school is providing for you. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mary Helen Immordino-Yang, for this inspirational talk and for helping us reframe the way we teach and approach teaching. So I think we have like 5 minutes for a few questions,
Sure.
if that's okay.
Sure.
I know who has the question first.
Hi, thanks for that. I'm over here. Hi, thanks for that excellent talk. I think many in the room here will be on board with what you've said about emotions being central to learning. I just want to hear a little bit more about some sort of granular detail in the classroom. So through your talk, I was reflecting on a recent teaching experience that I had, where I had started off the first 2 weeks actually doing something similar to you with these videos, really connecting the students with stories. And then I wanted to go deeper, and they had connected in this way, and I wanted to go deeper and show them the beauty. I'm a philosopher, so I showed them the beauty of an argument, right? And in one way, I felt I succeeded. I brought half the class with me.
Okay.
In one way, I felt I failed. I didn't manage
Because you brought half the class.
right?
Yeah.
Didn't quite see the sort of the detail there. And I failed in terms of not bringing them emotionally with me. So I'm just wondering if you could maybe talk to us a little bit more about what you maybe have seen in those classrooms you went to visit with great
Yeah.
teachers were maybe able to do
Yeah.
both at the same time.
Yeah. So really what the really great, so I'll tell you an example of a really great teacher whose class I sat in. So I went to a class at one of these schools, the schools in New York City it's an alternative school for kids. And it was a senior level English class. So it was a very high level English class. And those kids in that school setting don't use the New York State standard testing. Their schools have a dispensation not to use it. And instead, they do these things called performance-based assessments. So they have to do projects around the ideas and defend those projects, almost like mini dissertations in different academic areas. And they deep dive. And that's what the young man who's talking about his Zeno's paradox. That was one of his math projects, right? So this was one. And so the week before, the students hadn't been in school because the rest of the city was taking their standardized test. So what were they doing? They were home on their own and they read Kafka's Metamorphosis, okay? And they showed up in class that Monday, and I happened to be there to discuss what they had done. So I walked into class, and there's all of a sudden the kids just take all the chairs and they make them in a big circle, and everybody sits down. So I sit down in the big circle too, and they're all looking at each other, and they've got their book on their desk, and somebody starts talking about the book. And then somebody else pulls off that. And then they say, well, but what about? And they start having this conversation. And I'm thinking to myself, who's the teacher? And then after a few minutes, I start to realize there's one person whose questions are always a little bit more forward thinking, a little more broad ranging. I'm like, oh, that person must be the teacher, right? The kids are owning the class and they're taking it in these directions. And the teacher is shaping and steering the experience. I was so fascinated by what I was seeing that I reached down for a second in my bag to quickly text my friend because I was supposed to meet him, and I was supposed to just stay in the class for a little while, and I went out. And all of a sudden I realized the room's silent, and I look up from my text saying, I'm sorry, I'll meet you a half an hour late. And all the students are looking at me and they say, I'm sorry, could you put your cell phone away so we can continue with our conversation? Right? Those kids had established a norm in that class where they were deep diving into the ideas, in this case, of a book. And the teacher was there to push the conversation into directions they may not manage to get into on their own, not to impart the information at them. Another class in that school was called, it was a 10th grade history class that I went to, and it was called Democracy is an Argument. And it was about all of American history being taught from the perspective that democracy, American democracy, is a constant tension between the needs of individuals and the needs of groups. And how would we understand the entirety of our history in terms of that tension? What that teacher did is teaching the same American history that's required for everybody to know in the United States to graduate high school in a way that set the kids up to do what I would call, think about it transcendently, to move beyond just that fact and this happened and that war and it is on this date, and to think, wait, how do I understand the ideas and the intentions behind that action? What are the hidden motives? How are the feelings there? Why is it happening this way? What were the values? What were the beliefs? Those kids are going to learn history so much more thoroughly because the history is presented in a way that actually invites them to argue with it and to notice that it is inherently a tension, right? So it sounds like you were well on your way to beginning to do that, and you can work. It's this kind of teaching requires very, very deep knowledge of your subject matter, right? Because now you're looking to set people up with problems, in your case in philosophy, that invite them to need a philosophical argument to be able to satisfy themselves. They now are wanting to do what you're calling philosophy inadvertently by virtue of the way you've set out the class. They are hungry for it. And then you step in just in time and say, okay, here's how you can structure a really effective argument. It needs to have evidence. It needs to go in this way. It needs to, right? You need to watch the logical fallacies and, whatever. I'm not a philosopher, okay? But it sounds like you're on your way to doing that. But what we need to do with all of education is really recenter so that we're not using the outcomes, just like with that amazing study that Solange did in my lab, de Nervaux did with her dissertation around the Swiss kids, right? The outcome on the math test is not that's not information for you. That's useful. That tells you half the kids got the math, or the kids got the same amount of math. Well, that's fine. But that's not enough to really know how did the young person experience the doing of the math, because that is what is growing them over time. So you want to just keep working in the same direction. It sounds like you're onto something.
Thank you so much, Mayor Helen. I'm afraid that we are really out of time, and I think we would have to invite you again for another session of Q&A
my pleasure.
Talking about the classroom cases.
Yeah.
Let's give a round of applause to Mary Helen. Thank you so much for your inspiration for the day.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you.